Have you ever found out about a family event from someone outside the family? Not through an invite, not even a text, but a casual mention from an old friend on Instagram. Like, can't wait to see everyone at your sister's big party. Imagine that moment. You're staring at your phone, realizing there's a celebration happening. One that involves your own sister, and you weren't even told. At first, I thought maybe it was a surprise, maybe I'd hear something soon. But hours passed, days, nothing, just silence. And then I started wondering, was it really an accident? Or had I already been quietly written out of the story? I kept refreshing my messages, checking for any clue that this was all in my head. But it wasn't. The deeper truth hit me when I saw the official RSVP site, and there was no trace of my name, no mention, not even a misspelled version tucked somewhere in the margins. That's when it sank in. I wasn't invited. I wasn't even considered. It's one thing to be forgotten. It's another to be intentionally left out. And yet, despite every sign that I should stay away, I made a decision. I was going to show up. Not to crash, not to cause drama, but because sometimes you need to see for yourself how far the people who are supposed to love you are willing to go to pretend you don't exist. What happened next? I wasn't ready for. Not even close. Have you ever convinced yourself that the pain would be worth it if the ending turned out beautiful enough? That was me that morning, wrapping a cake in layers of towels, setting my GPS for a 9-hour drive through an incoming snowstorm, and whispering under my breath, "This is love. This is what love does." I left the city before sunrise, the skyline fading in my rearview mirror like a chapter closing behind me. My trunk was full, but my heart was even heavier, full of memories, doubts, and a small, stubborn hope that maybe this drive would fix something distance hadn't. The roads were already slick, ice curling at the edges of the highway signs. But I kept going, gripping the wheel with white knuckles and humming to stay calm. Somewhere around mile 120, I hit my first patch of black ice. The car slid just enough to wake me up fully. My hands shook, but I didn't stop. I told myself that if I could just make it there, just walk through those doors with the cake intact, everything would be okay. My sister would see me. She'd smile like we were kids again. That's what I wanted to believe. There was a moment at a gas station halfway through the drive, snow swirling under yellow lights, where I stood in the restroom, changing out of my travel clothes into a dress I hadn't worn in years. I caught my reflection in the mirror and said out loud, "You can do this." My cheeks were flushed, my eyes tired, but there was still a flicker of hope in them, the kind that comes from years of forgiving people who never asked to be forgiven. By the time I turned onto the final stretch of road, the sun had dipped behind the hills, and the mansion finally came into view, glowing like a fairy tale behind rows of snow-dusted trees. I tightened my coat, adjusted the ribbon on the cake box in the passenger seat, and whispered one more time, "She's worth it." But what I didn't know then was that the storm I had just driven through was nothing compared to the one waiting inside. You'd think that after a drive like that, after almost skidding off the road, after nearly freezing my fingers off at the gas pump, after talking myself into hope at every rest stop, the hardest part would be over. But no. As it turns out, the real cold didn't come from the snow. It came from the people who were supposed to know my name, my face, my heart. The mansion was glowing like something out of a bridal magazine. Gold lights curled around black iron gates. Violins floated faintly in the air. It looked like warmth, like welcome. But the second I pulled up, that illusion cracked. The valet blinked at me, confused. "Are you with catering?" he asked, eyeing the box in my hands. I forced a smile. "No, I'm family." He didn't reply, just took my keys like he wasn't sure if I was joking or delusional. Inside, the warmth of the building hit me like a wave, but it never made it past my skin. The air smelled like roses and vanilla, soft and elegant. Exactly the kind of event my sister would plan. But not a single head turned in recognition. Not one smile reached me. Women in satin gowns glanced at me, then away, their eyes trailing down to the wet hem of my coat like it offended them. I walked slowly, clutching the cake box like it was armor, like it had the power to prove I belonged there. Then I saw her, Vina, standing near the center of the room in a blush silk dress, hair curled to perfection, laughing at something someone whispered in her ear. She looked like the version of herself that lives on Instagram, flawless, polished, untouchable, until her eyes met mine. Her laugh died, her smile fell, and all she said was, "You actually came?" It hit me like wind through an open door. That look on her face, it wasn't surprise. It was inconvenience, like I had shown up with mud on my shoes and wrecked the whole aesthetic. I swallowed the sting and replied, "I drove all day." Surprise. But the surprise, it seemed, was mine. Have you ever walked into a room full of familiar faces and realized you're the only stranger there? That's what it felt like. Like I'd stepped into a dream someone else was having, and I didn't belong in it. Not because I didn't know the people, but because they had already decided to forget me. After Vina's lukewarm greeting, she drifted away with the same grace she always carried, like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't just driven through a blizzard to be there. And I stood there, still holding the cake like it meant something. Around me, conversations flowed, laughter, clinking glasses, cheerful congratulations, but none of it included me. A bridesmaid brushed past and muttered something under her breath. I didn't catch the words, but I caught the tone. I always catch the tone. I made my way to a side table, gently setting down the cake next to a tray of glossy macarons, and tried to steady my hands, still trembling from the road, or maybe from something colder. I scanned the room for my mother. I thought maybe she'd ground me, offer at least a smile. When I found her near the fireplace, dressed in pearls and navy, she looked up with polite surprise. "Oh, you made it," she said, then leaned in for an air kiss that barely brushed my cheek. "Just don't make this about you, okay? Tonight is for Vina." Her voice was tight, almost warning, and that's when it hit me. No one here was shocked I hadn't been invited. They were shocked I had come anyway. The smiles people gave me were curated, polite, measured. They looked like smiles, but they didn't feel like them. It was as if they'd all gotten the same script and no one had rehearsed what to say if I actually showed up. So instead they glanced away, or looked right through me, and the more invisible I felt, the more I started to wonder if that had been the point all along. There's a moment when you realize you're not just being excluded. You're being erased. Not loudly, not cruelly, but quietly, strategically, like you were never meant to be part of the picture in the first place. That moment came to me somewhere between the dessert table and the gift display. After circling the room with no real interaction, I made my way to the corner where bridal gifts were being displayed. Delicate boxes wrapped in ivory paper, each tied with ribbons and topped with handwritten name cards. 10 gifts, all matching, laid out like some sacred offering. I looked for mine. Maybe it had fallen. Maybe someone moved it. I scanned twice. Then again. Nothing. My name wasn't there. Not even a placeholder. Just air. I sat down on the edge of a nearby bench, trying to act like I was just resting my feet. My chest was tight. My fingers curled into my coat sleeves. The room buzzed around me, but I was somewhere else. Adrift in that foggy place you go when disappointment starts to settle into your bones. Then my phone buzzed. A group text lit up the screen, bridal party chat. I wasn't supposed to be in it. Maybe someone added me by mistake. Maybe it was divine intervention. But as I scrolled, I saw the truth in plain text. One message, earlier that day, from Vina's number. "She doesn't fit the look. We'll say the list was full." I didn't cry. Not right away. I just stared at those words. Cold. Clinical. calculated. That's when it all became clear. The cake, the silence, the side glances, they weren't accidents. They were decisions. Every little moment was a brick in a wall I hadn't realized they'd been building for years. And now that it was finished, I was finally seeing it for what it was. I stood up slowly, knees stiff, the corners of my eyes stinging. The cake I had brought, 3 delicate layers of lemon and sugared violets, still sat unopened, untouched, like a love letter no one wanted to read. I placed a soft hand on its lid, more out of habit than anything else. I wasn't a guest here. I wasn't even an afterthought. I was the ghost in the room, only visible when they needed someone to whisper about. Some truths don't break you with volume. They break you in whispers. You don't stumble upon them with drama or confrontation, but with quiet accidents. And once you hear them, you can't unhear them. That's what happened next. I wasn't looking for proof. I already had the group chat, the cold shoulders, the empty seat. But the universe, it seems, wanted to make sure I really understood. I had wandered into the service hallway by mistake, trying to find the restroom. The polished corridors of the estate gave way to tighter spaces, lined with catering carts and the hum of overhead fluorescents. I paused to reorient myself, coat folded in my arms, when I heard laughter echoing from just around the corner. Familiar laughter. Her laugh. My sister, Vina. And then a voice that made my stomach twist. Blythe, her best friend since college, the one who always looked at me like I was something stuck to her shoe. I can't believe she actually drove here, Blythe giggled, her voice dripping with mockery. Vina didn't miss a beat. 9 hours through a snowstorm. For what? A pity cupcake. They both burst into laughter, the kind that didn't feel spontaneous. It felt rehearsed. Practiced. Sharp. Blythe added, God, what if she'd crashed? Can you imagine the sympathy? And Vina, she chuckled, not nervously, not out of shock, but genuinely. Honestly, she said, I could have used the silence. I froze. Every part of me stopped, lungs, limbs, logic. It wasn't just the cruelty. It was how casual it was, like they weren't talking about a person, like they were commenting on the weather. I stepped back slowly, careful not to make a sound, like any movement might snap the scene and make it worse. But the damage was already done. That hallway, with its beige linoleum and smell of catering trays, became the setting of my breaking point. Not the ballroom, not the cake table, that hallway, because that's where I stopped making excuses for her. That's where I stopped hoping this was just a misunderstanding. And that's when I knew. They didn't just want me out of the picture. They wanted to rewrite the story as if I was never in it. Silence had been my armor for years. I wore it at family dinners, at birthdays I wasn't really invited to, at holidays where I brought gifts no one remembered receiving. I had mastered the art of shrinking, of swallowing words, of pretending things didn't hurt as deeply as they did. But something in that hallway, in those cruel, effortless words, cracked something open in me. And this time I didn't patch it up. I let it stay broken, because broken things make noise, and I was done being quiet. I didn't scream. I didn't storm into the ballroom and make a scene. That would have made me exactly who they said I was: dramatic, attention-seeking, unstable. Instead, I chose a different kind of loud, the kind that echoes without raising a voice. I walked back to the coat room, wiped my eyes one last time, and pulled out my phone. Then I began to document. Photo of the untouched cake, screenshot of the group text, a draft email with the catering invoice. I wasn't doing it to hurt anyone. I was doing it because someday someone would ask what really happened. And I needed to be able to say, this is what you didn't see. Then I opened Instagram. I posted 3 quiet images: the silver cake box untouched on the side table, the frost-coated windshield from the road, and a blurry selfie I'd taken when I first arrived, still smiling, still hopeful. My caption was simple: Sometimes you show up for people who wouldn't shovel your name off a sidewalk. Some things you do out of love. Some things teach you who deserves it. I turned off comments after 2 hours, just before the flood started, because it wasn't about what they had to say. It was about finally saying something for myself. Not begging to be seen. Not screaming to be believed. Just leaving a trail of truth behind so I wouldn't have to carry the weight of it anymore. The thing about telling your truth is people rarely thank you for it, especially when your truth threatens the version of reality they've spent years curating. I didn't expect praise. I didn't expect applause. But I also didn't expect how fast they'd try to rewrite the narrative. And this time, they weren't just whispering behind my back. They were publishing the whispers. The first sign came the next morning. A friend texted me a screenshot from a local wedding blog, one of those anonymous tip gossip sites. The headline? Sister of bride allegedly crashes engagement party in emotional breakdown. My stomach dropped. The article was vague but pointed, talking about a long-lost sister who arrived uninvited, caused a scene, and disappeared after upsetting the bride. No names, but the details were clear. Too clear. I knew who had written it, or at least who had fed it. My hands trembled as I scrolled through Vina's Instagram next. There she was, perfectly posed with her bridesmaids under fairy lights. Champagne flute in hand, captioned, "Sometimes jealousy wears a familiar face, but real love shines through." No tag, no mention, just a perfectly placed dig. The comments rolled in like waves, heart emojis, hashtag bride vibes, and a few thinly veiled nods to drama. But the worst part? People believed it, because that's what happens when you're quiet for too long. They fill in the blanks for you. I'd spent years letting others tell my story. Now that I'd spoken, they were desperate to take the pen back. But this time I had receipts, and I was done letting them paint me as the villain. I compiled everything, the screenshots, the photo of the untouched cake, even a brief clip of that group chat message. Then I sent a clean, calm email to one recipient, the public relations department of Vina's fiancé's company. No dramatic subject line, no angry body text, just one line. Attached is the context behind the narrative being circulated. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted consequences. And sometimes they're one and the same. Sometimes the truth doesn't need a stage. It just needs a moment. A window of silence, wide enough for your voice to slip through. And that moment came sooner than I expected. 2 days after the blog post, after the Instagram digs, after the texts from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, came the brunch. A soft Sunday affair at Aunt Ray's house. Supposedly casual, supposedly family. But even before I stepped through the door, I could feel it, the tension humming in the air like static before lightning. The room was all cream-colored sweaters and mimosa flutes. My mother gave me the kind of nod you'd give someone who accidentally showed up to the wrong meeting. Venus stood at the far end of the room, already glowing under the soft light, her voice sugary as she tapped her glass. This week reminded me how beautiful it is when family chooses love over ego, she said, words dripping slow and rehearsed. A few chuckles followed. Eyes flicked toward me. That was it. The dig. Smooth, subtle venom in a lace dress. But this time I didn't look away. I stood up slowly, placed my glass down without a sound, and walked toward the center of the room. Mind if I say something too? I asked. You could feel the air shift. Aunt Ray's fork froze midair. Vina blinked, faltering. I drove 9 hours in a snowstorm for that party, I began, with a handmade cake that's still sitting in your kitchen. I stood in that room while people laughed about me, joked about how peaceful it would have been if I crashed on the way there. Gasps. One sharp cough from Blythe. My mother's face drained of color. Venus shook her head, tried to recover. That was taken out of context. I raised my phone, thumb already hovering. Let me play the context, then. And I did. The room filled with the sound of their laughter, clear and unmistakable. 9 hours for what? A pity cupcake? Then Blythe's mocking giggle, then the line that had cut deepest. Honestly, I could have used the silence. When I stopped the recording, there was no chaos, no shouting, just stillness, real, heavy stillness. Vina's fiancé stared at her like he didn't recognize her anymore. My mother reached for her wine glass but said nothing. No one defended her, because this time the truth was too loud to ignore. Vina lunged forward, hissing, "You don't get to twist this." I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I simply replied, "You twisted it the second you decided humiliation was easier than honesty." And then I walked out. No tears, no drama, just a truth finally spoken, in a room full of people who could no longer pretend they hadn't heard it. Some storms, and not with thunder, but with silence, the kind that doesn't ache, doesn't shout, doesn't demand anything back. Just quiet, clean. After that brunch, after I played the recording, after I stood tall in a room that used to make me feel small, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt still. And in that stillness, something shifted. I drove home alone that afternoon, the wind brushing against my windows, the roads clear now in every sense of the word. No missed calls. No let's talk texts. Just the hum of tires on pavement and the faint buzz of my phone in the passenger seat. Muted, irrelevant. For once, I didn't feel like I needed to respond to every opinion or defend myself from every twist of the truth. I didn't owe anyone an explanation, and God, that felt like freedom. Back in my apartment, I made tea, lit a candle, and pulled out the journal I hadn't written in since college. On one torn-out page from years ago, I'd scribbled, "Maybe if I'm quieter, they'll love me louder." I stared at that sentence. Then I burned it over the sink. That girl didn't live here anymore. A few days passed, then a week. And for once, I didn't spiral in the silence. I settled into it. The snow melted outside. The streets were slushy but calm. And when my phone finally did buzz, this time from Vina, I didn't flinch. I didn't feel hope or anger, just clarity. I let the message sit unopened, like a suitcase packed for a trip I'd never take again. That silence mattered, because it wasn't the cold shoulder anymore. It wasn't punishment. It was peace, the kind that comes when you stop asking people to see you and start seeing yourself. Weeks passed. Not much changed on the outside. I still lived in the same apartment, still drank my coffee from the chipped blue mug that once belonged to my grandmother. But something inside me had shifted permanently, like I had finally stepped out of a room I'd been locked in for years. And even though no one had opened the door for me, I had found my own way out. I started walking more, just around the block at first, then through the park, letting the sun hit parts of my face that hadn't felt warmth in a while. I signed up for a ceramics class at the community center, something I'd always wanted to do but never thought I was allowed to. The first piece I made was a little uneven, a lopsided bowl, but I loved it. It was the first thing I'd shaped entirely with my own hands, for no one else's approval. Then, one afternoon, I got a message from a woman named Maya, a friend of a friend who had seen my Instagram post about the cake. She ran a local nonprofit that supported siblings of children with high needs or high expectations. She said my words had struck something in her. She asked if I would consider sharing my story in a small group circle they hosted every month. I said yes before I could overthink it, not because I needed to tell it again, but because maybe someone else needed to hear it. That night, I stood in a room filled with strangers and spoke about what it feels like to be invisible in your own family, to love people who treat your silence as consent, And when I was done, there was no applause. Just a few nods, a few tears, and one woman, maybe 40, maybe 60, who reached for my hand and whispered, "Thank you. You said what I never could." That moment became a turning point. I didn't go back to Vina's world. I didn't need to. The truth had done its work. Her wedding got pushed, then quietly canceled. I heard through a cousin that her fiancé had needed time. I didn't smile at the news. I just felt done. It wasn't my storm to carry anymore. Instead, I focused on building something softer, something honest. I adopted a dog, a shaggy little rescue with anxious eyes and a tail that wagged like it was still learning how to be happy. I named her Clementine. Every morning, she reminded me what starting over looked like. Slow, unsure, but still wagging. On the 1-year anniversary of the engagement party, the night that changed everything, I bought myself a new cake. Nothing fancy, just vanilla bean with honey frosting and fresh berries on top. I lit a single candle, not for a wish, but for a promise. I will never shrink again to make someone else more comfortable. I didn't toast. I didn't post. I just took a bite and smiled. Because this wasn't the story of a girl who lost her place in a family. It was the story of a woman who found her place in the world. Sometimes the hardest thing we'll ever do is walk away from the people we always thought would walk with us. But healing isn't about fixing the past. It's about honoring yourself enough to stop chasing a seat at someone else's table and start building your own. If you've ever felt like the invisible one, like the backup plan, like your voice didn't matter, I want you to know you're not alone. Your story matters. Your existence matters. And sometimes the greatest peace comes not when you're welcomed back, but when you realize you never needed their permission to be whole. If this story touched something in you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been made to feel like you were too much for simply showing up as yourself? Let's talk about it. This is a safe space for real voices and real healing. And if you believe in stories that speak the truth, that honor quiet strength, and that remind us we're not broken, just becoming, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss the next chapter. Thanks for being here. Your voice belongs.